Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the Monday edition of Today here on eNCA DSTV Channel 403. I'm Dan Moyane. Now, our country is currently facing multiple crises. Unemployment, though, ranks among the highest in the world. Race remains a key factor in the extensive inequality, not to mention the shortage of much-needed skills. For more on how these issues, especially the skills and the employment one, might be addressed, I'm joined now by Labour analyst Sherisa Rajah. Sherisa, good afternoon. Welcome to Today. Thank you for joining us. I read an article in the City Press yesterday by organizational strategist and author Thabang Motsoe. He talks about a number of things: leadership, policies, politics, and all that. But what really got my attention is a point he makes from a Labour perspective. Like he says, it's actually baffling, to quote him, profoundly baffling, that we have chosen to emphasize high skills and technology instead of the labor-intensive schemes that can absorb more hands on the deck and address unemployment. Would you agree with that sentiment?
I think you need a good combination of both to ensure the livelihood of the South African economy at present.
So it's not either or, it's both and.
I would definitely think so. I think you certainly need a strong presence of self-employment and entrepreneurship in our economy. And coupled with that, you definitely need the solutions that employ multiple hands. Your mining, engineering, construction sort of sectors have to be thriving. But for that to be thriving, you need the other things mentioned there around leadership, sustainable growth and development to address the really high rates of unemployment in the country at present.
Leadership in what form? Because we've had labor summits, we've had job summits, rather, let me call them that, in the recent past, but we're not making a dent on the stubbornly high unemployment rate, particularly among our young people.
Yeah, I mean, when I was still back in South Africa, I remember the Youth Employment Services initiative had only just been launched at that moment in time. And certainly when you start talking about young people and you talk about youth unemployment, you realize that the future of the country lies in the hands of ensuring, at minimum, basic education for youth and a transfer of skills from those retiring, leaving posts, to ensure the continuity of the strategy, the growth, the vision of a business, so that it is sustainable and viable for the years to come, particularly when you start looking at the longevity of key sectors in the country that we rely on for our bread and butter, mining, construction in particular, just to name a few.
Yeah, and some of them, as you've mentioned, mining, you could add agriculture, they export the produce, but you still find that the manual labor there has been reduced over time because of technological advances.
Yeah, and I'll say this, there are a number of times when living in the UK now, you would call a call center or you would speak to a fellow South African, and you realize that if we're not using our own labor that can be provided by our fellow South Africans, other companies outside of our borders are in fact doing that before we get there. So we should definitely be tapping into that, and we should also be looking at ways to expand that across the border for ourselves at our own initiative, as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah.
I've been following the development in the Nordics right now, where they are reducing the threshold for people to come and enter on skilled work visas because they have so many vacancies and not enough people to fill those jobs. Germany was reported to be doing the same because they're losing millions of euros a year on vacancies in key sectors of their economy. And I think as South Africans, we should be looking to say, well, how can we tap into that? You know, we've got people here and you've got vacancies there. What kind of cross-border solutions can we come up with to be able to leverage and mutually benefit from situations such as this?
Yeah. In your view, from a labor perspective, what kind of opportunities could we grab as a country to absorb the high unemployment demographic? I mean, we have high levels of lack of education, for example, qualified skills. But we've got this labor that's sitting there that could be used. I mean, where are the gaps? How could we leverage it, Sherisa, to benefit our young people?
Yeah, that's a very important question. I think that certainly what I'm seeing as moves in the employment space is the world of borderless work, where we're looking at what work can be done in a remote perspective. And so far, we've only been looking at in-country perspective in South Africa, or maybe we look at SADC, we look at our neighboring countries. But what about looking at places where there are these huge potentials for our labor to address these issues of unemployment, because they simply don't have, in Europe, by example, there's a serious problem of an aging population and too many vacancies. So I would look to say, well, we've got all these professionals who at first glance might be wanting to leave the country. How do we route them? How can we bring these vacancies to them? That would be the first thing. The second thing would be, well, what about labor? What about youth? Where can I ensure transfer of skills, internships, exposure to what is happening on the other side of the pond, so that I create a democratization of the movements in the economy by sector? Globally, we address what's happening in mining, construction, engineering, agriculture, and we address education from a global perspective. The EU has been very good to do it. The EU, on the 1st of July this year, signed the framework agreement where cross-border workers are allowed to move up to 49.99% of the time between EU member states who signed into this agreement. As African countries, then the question for me is, how can we as neighbors support each other? And where in our global diplomatic relations can we also support each other?
Yeah, this is not a political question because you're a labor analyst, Sherisa, but later this week, President Ramaphosa will be joining several other African leaders in St. Petersburg in Russia as they discuss all kinds of possible partnerships and cooperation across different sectors. And also, I understand from the South African presidency, there will also be, Ramaphosa will take the opportunity to talk to the Russians about bilateral relations. I mean, Russia is a powerhouse. South Africa is not a powerhouse in that sense, in a global sense. It plays an important role. But I mean, from a labor perspective, do you think, and the BRICS summit is coming up here next month, do you think this kind of approach should also be applied among those kind of countries like Russia in terms of trying to look for opportunities for employing our graduates? We've got many graduates here in the country who are unemployed.
Yeah, I think the opportunity for cross-border work post-COVID-19 is ample. And it saddens me deeply when I realize that we are so slow to act on it. When I look at opportunities like the framework agreement in the EU, I don't understand why we are so slow to create these same or similar opportunities for ourselves as South Africans, particularly for our graduates and for our tenured skill who can create opportunities if we root them in the country.
Yeah, so and who can do it is the leadership. I mean, do you think we've got good leadership in terms of our labor approach of how we are addressing unemployment, especially for young people, Sherisa, as we conclude?
I'll say this. I think the labor approach for unemployment needs to be multifaceted. We need to look at it from the perspective of who are our taxpayers, who can create opportunities for employment, and who are the employable people we are looking to target. It really has to be multifaceted so that we create a sustainable solution for our country for the future.
Yeah, the world is certainly a different place, so to speak, since the COVID-19 pandemic, and there are many opportunities in the labor market to be taken advantage of. Thank you very much, Sherisa Rajah. She's a labor analyst, just looking at what could we be doing to make a dent into the stubbornly high unemployment rate, especially among our young people, both in the informal and the formal sector.